December 7, 1942. A frigid dawn broke over Royal Air Force Scampton in Lincolnshire, England, as Mess Sergeant Arthur Holloway stood in the base kitchen measuring precise amounts of honey, oats, dried fruit, nuts, and bitter chocolate onto a well-worn brass scale. In his weathered hands lay what he believed was merely a nutritious treat for exhausted bomber crews. He could not have imagined his simple creation would soon be credited with saving hundreds of lives and possibly altering the course of strategic bombing campaigns. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable tale of how a humble cook with no formal nutrition training inadvertently created a performance-enhancing food that would transform how Allied air forces maintained pilot alertness during the most grueling missions of World War II. Flight Lieutenant James Westfield rubbed his eyes as the briefing room slowly filled with bleary-eyed crew members of 507 Squadron, Royal Air Force Bomber Command. The mission board displayed their target for tonight, a manufacturing complex deep in the industrial heart of the Ruhr Valley. The anticipated flight time, 18 hours round trip, 6 hours each way with additional hours for ingress, target identification, bombing runs and evasive maneuvers. Westfield's stomach tightened. The previous month, March 1943, 5 crews from his squadron had disappeared during similar extended operations, with fatigue-related mistakes suspected in at least 3 cases. "Attention!" called out Wing Commander Harold Bennett as he strode into the room, followed by an unlikely companion, Mess Sergeant Arthur Holloway, a stout man in his 50s with a balding head and flour-dusted apron. The room fell silent. "Gentlemen," began Bennett, his voice grave but determined, "tonight's operation represents one of our deepest penetrations into enemy territory. You'll be facing not just flak and fighters, but your own human limitations." He gestured to the mess sergeant. "Sergeant Holloway has been working with our medical officer on something that might help keep you alert when your bodies most want to surrender to sleep." Holloway cleared his throat nervously. "It's not much, sirs, but I've prepared these." He opened a small wooden box containing what looked like thick, dark rectangular bars, wrapped in waxed paper. 5 ingredients only. My wife's been making something similar for our son, who works 18-hour shifts at the munitions factory. The medical officer says they release energy slowly, unlike those sugar candies that give you a spike, then drop you down lower than before. Skeptical murmurs rippled through the assembled airmen. Squadron leader Richard Thomas, a veteran pilot with 27 missions to his credit, scoffed audibly. "With all due respect, sir, are we really pinning our hopes on some cook's recipe?" In the aircraft assembly plant in Detroit, Michigan, production manager Eleanor Matheson was facing entirely different challenges. Sleek P-51 Mustang fighters were rolling off the production line at an unprecedented rate. 8 complete aircraft per day, 4 times the output of any comparable German facility. Yet pilots were still being lost at alarming rates, not just to enemy action, but to errors made during the long escort missions protecting bomber formations all the way to Berlin and back. "The problem isn't the aircraft," explained Major William Harrison of the 8th Air Force to the assembled factory workers. "Our boys are flying the finest machines ever built. The problem is human endurance. Our pilots are falling asleep at the controls or making fatal errors after 12, 14, 16 hours of sustained concentration." Eleanor, whose husband was a bomber pilot stationed in England, listened with particular attention. That evening, as she sorted through his most recent letter, a curious detail caught her eye. He mentioned something the British crews called crazy bars, homemade energy rations created by a mess sergeant that were supposedly allowing bomber crews to remain alert for unprecedented durations. "It sounds absolutely ridiculous," her husband had written, "but those who've tried them swear by their effectiveness. Command is beginning to take notice after Extended Flight Group 7 returned with all aircraft intact after 19 hours airborne. They're attributing it partly to these strange bars." Across the English Channel, Oberleutnant Kurt Müller of the Luftwaffe's night fighter wing stared in disbelief at the intelligence reports. British bomber incursions were now regularly lasting 16 to 18 hours. Operational durations the Luftwaffe had deemed physiologically impossible without crew rotation, which was obviously unattainable in combat aircraft. They must have developed some new stimulant, suggested Intelligence Officer Werner Schmidt, pushing his wire-rimmed glasses up his nose. Perhaps a pharmaceutical approach similar to the Pervitin we issue to our pilots. Muller frowned. Pervitin, the methamphetamine tablets widely distributed to German forces, was effective but carried severe costs. Psychosis, addiction, devastating crashes when the effect wore off. Many of his best pilots had been destroyed not by enemy fire, but by the very substance meant to enhance their performance. Whatever they're using, Muller replied, it's allowing them to operate beyond normal human limitations. The question is, how are they managing this without the side effects we're seeing? Back at RAF Scampton, the pre-dawn briefing room buzzed with anticipation as Wing Commander Bennett reviewed the previous night's mission results. 507 Squadron had delivered their payloads with unprecedented accuracy despite the 18-hour flight duration. Most remarkably, all aircraft had returned, a rare occurrence for such extended operations. Preliminary reports suggest significantly improved crew alertness throughout the mission, Bennett announced, unable to keep a note of wonder from his voice. Navigator calculations remained precise even in the final hours, and pilot responses during the landing approach showed none of the degradation we typically observe after extended flights. Flight Lieutenant Westfield raised his hand. "Sir, permission to speak freely." Bennett nodded. "Those bars Sergeant Holloway provided, I was skeptical, but I've never experienced anything like it. Not like caffeine or other stimulants. No jitters, no crash. Just sustained clarity." He glanced around, finding nods of agreement among his fellow airmen. My gunner, who normally gets splitting headaches after 10 hours aloft, remained fully functional throughout. Whatever's in those things, we need more of them. Mess Sergeant Arthur Holloway had never received so much attention in his 26 years of military service. The son of a baker from Cornwall, his culinary career had been respectable but unremarkable until now. Suddenly he found himself summoned to meetings with medical officers, nutritionists, and even a representative from the Ministry of Food. "Walk us through the ingredients again, Sergeant," requested Captain Howard Phillips, the base medical officer. Holloway shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Nothing special, sir. Rolled oats as the base, the slow-cooking kind, not the quick ones. Raw honey for binding and sweetness. Dried cherries from my wife's garden. Walnuts for protein and fat, and a small amount of dark bitter chocolate." "That's all? No secret additives? No pharmaceutical components?" pressed the ministry representative. "Absolutely not, sir." Holloway looked offended. "Just good, honest ingredients combined in specific proportions. My wife discovered the recipe while trying to keep our son alert during his factory shifts. He was falling asleep and risking injury around the machinery." Phillips consulted his notes. "The proportions seem critical. Your first test batch didn't produce the same results." Holloway nodded. "Correct, sir. It's 28% oats, 22% honey, 22% dried cherries, 18% walnuts, and 10% bitter chocolate. Mixed cold, pressed firmly, and left to set for at least 8 hours. The chocolate must be the bitter type, at least 70% cocoa, and the cherries must be fully dried but not sweetened." Back in Detroit, Eleanor Matheson had taken the information from her husband's letter to Dr. Robert Campbell, a nutritionist consulting for the War Department. Initially skeptical, Campbell had nonetheless agreed to analyze the described combination of ingredients. "There might actually be something to this," he admitted after several days of research. "The combination contains several compounds that could work synergistically. The oats provide slow-release carbohydrates. Honey offers glucose and fructose that absorb at different rates. Walnuts contain omega-3 fatty acids that support brain function. Dark chocolate has small amounts of caffeine and theobromine, milder stimulants than pure caffeine alone." "And the cherries?" Eleanor asked. "That might be the most interesting component," Campbell replied, excitement creeping into his voice. "Certain varieties of cherries contain natural melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep cycles, plus compounds that reduce inflammation. It's possible they're helping maintain natural alertness rhythms rather than artificially suppressing fatigue like conventional stimulants." "So this cook accidentally created a perfect storm of nutritional science?" Eleanor asked incredulously. Sometimes the most profound discoveries come through intuition and observation rather than formal research, Campbell said with a shrug. Folk wisdom occasionally stumbles upon truths that science takes decades to validate. As spring turned to summer in 1943, what had begun as one cook's homemade recipe was evolving into a coordinated production effort. The Women's Voluntary Service had been enlisted to produce the bars, now officially designated Aircrew Energy Sustenance Type C, though everyone still called them Crazy Bars after Holloway's initials, Charles Arthur Raymond Ainsley Holloway, and their seemingly magical effects. Production faced immediate challenges. The precise cherry variety from Holloway's wife's garden, Montmorency tart cherries, proved difficult to source in needed quantities. Initial substitutions with other varieties yielded disappointing results. Similarly, the specific Cornish honey Holloway used contained a higher proportion of certain compounds than commercial alternatives. "We need to standardize production while maintaining efficacy," insisted Group Captain William Harcourt, who had been assigned to oversee the program. "The operational advantages these bars provide are too significant to leave to chance or limited supply." Across the Atlantic, Eleanor Matheson had moved from curiosity to action, working with Dr. Campbell, and with permission from her superiors at the aircraft plant, she had established a parallel development program. Using her husband's detailed descriptions and Campbell's nutritional analysis, they created American prototypes dubbed endurance rations for testing with training squadrons. "Initial results are promising," Campbell reported after the first trials with pilots at Selfridge Field. Reaction times after 14 hours remained nearly as sharp as at mission start. Even more remarkably, recovery time was dramatically reduced. Pilots reported feeling refreshed after just 6 hours of sleep, compared to the usual 12 hours needed after extended missions. Meanwhile, in occupied France, French resistance operative Marie Duchamp received an unusual request from her British handlers: source large quantities of Montmorency cherries and specific regional honey varieties without attracting German attention. The coded message identified these as critical aviation components, a designation normally reserved for aircraft parts or fuel additives, not food ingredients. "They must be desperate if they're risking resistance networks for food supplies," remarked fellow resistance member Jean Rousseau as they plotted the acquisition. "If it helps Allied pilots stay alert enough to bomb German positions more accurately, I'd risk much more than this," Marie replied, studying a map of orchards in the Loire Valley. "Besides, the Germans will never suspect we're smuggling dried fruit and honey. They're looking for weapons and radio parts, not baking ingredients." By August 1943, the impact of the energy bars was becoming measurable. RAF Bomber Command's analysis showed a 17% reduction in aircraft losses during extended operations among squadrons supplied with the rations compared to those without. Navigator error rates during the critical final hours of return flights dropped by nearly 23%. Perhaps most tellingly, pilot reaction times during simulated emergency procedures after 15 hours remained within 8% of baseline performance, compared to the typical 40% degradation observed previously. Wing Commander Bennett called a special briefing for 507 Squadron, which had been the primary test group for the new rations. "Gentlemen, the results speak for themselves. What began as Sergeant Holloway's home recipe has proven to be a genuine operational advantage. Bomber Command is now implementing these rations across all squadrons, undertaking missions exceeding 12 hours. Flight Lieutenant Westfield raised his hand. "Sir, have we determined why these work so much better than the standard-issued chocolate and other stimulants?" "Medical Command believes it's the combination of ingredients releasing energy at different rates," Bennett explained. "Unlike caffeine or other stimulants, these rations don't force alertness by flooding the body with chemicals that eventually lead to a crash. They support the body's natural mechanisms. Think of it as providing steady fuel, rather than a sudden burst of power that burns out your engine." Squadron Leader Thomas, initially the most vocal skeptic, nodded thoughtfully. "I've flown 38 combat missions, and I've never felt as clear-headed after 15 hours as I did on our last run. Whatever's in those bars, they're making a difference when it matters most. Those final hours when we're most vulnerable, and mistakes are deadliest." In Berlin, the Luftwaffe High Command was growing increasingly concerned about the extended reach and effectiveness of Allied bombing campaigns. Oberst Wilhelm Franke of the Air Defense Command pounded his fist on the conference table. They are now hitting targets we previously considered safely beyond their operational range. Not just reaching them, but delivering precise attacks and returning with unacceptable success rates. Our intelligence indicates no significant aircraft modifications to explain this extended range and effectiveness. Intelligence Officer Schmidt cleared his throat nervously. We have intercepted communications suggesting a new form of aircrew ration might be contributing to their enhanced endurance capabilities. Food? Franke's eyebrows rose incredulously. You're suggesting Allied pilots are outperforming ours because of superior sandwiches. Not sandwiches, Herr Oberst. A specifically formulated energy ration developed by British food scientists. Our sources indicate it maintains alertness without the side effects of Pervitin or other pharmaceutical stimulants. Franke's dismissive expression faded as he considered the implications. German air crews had been increasingly suffering from the after-effects of methamphetamine use, psychosis, extreme exhaustion, addiction. If the Allies had discovered a nutritional approach that provided enhanced alertness without these devastating side effects, it represented a significant advantage. I want samples obtained and analyzed immediately, Franke ordered, and increase aircraft rotations for long-range defense operations. Until we can counter this advantage, we need fresh crews intercepting their bombers, especially during their return flights, when they expect our defenses to be thinnest. As Allied bombing campaigns intensified through the autumn of 1943, the energy bars underwent continuous refinement. Nutrition scientists from Britain and America established a joint research unit dedicated to understanding and enhancing the bar's effectiveness. They discovered that slight variations in formulation could be tailored to different mission profiles: higher fat content for extreme cold operations, additional protein for missions requiring intense concentration over moderate durations, increased carbohydrates for the longest endurance requirements. The program expanded beyond bomber crews to include fighter escort pilots, maritime patrol aircraft, and even certain ground units undertaking extended operations. Production scaled accordingly, with specialized kitchens established throughout Britain and eventually in American bases as well. Quality control became paramount as the precise ratios and ingredients proved critical to effectiveness. This has evolved from a lucky discovery to a science, Dr. Campbell explained to Eleanor Matheson as they toured a dedicated production facility near Detroit. We're now producing 4 variants optimized for different operational requirements, with strict quality controls for each ingredient. Eleanor watched as women workers carefully measured components on calibrated scales. Have you determined exactly why they work so effectively? We've identified several mechanisms, Campbell replied. The combination creates a cascading release of energy. Some components are absorbed quickly, others medium-term, still others very slowly. The cherry compounds appear to regulate the body's natural alertness cycles rather than overriding them. And certain antioxidants in the walnuts and dark chocolate seem to mitigate the cognitive inflammation that typically occurs during extended wakefulness. So Sergeant Holloway created the perfect combination entirely by accident. Campbell smiled. Sometimes the most elegant scientific solutions arise from practical experience and observation rather than laboratory theory. His wife noticed what worked for their son and refined it through trial and error. We're just understanding the why behind their what. By early 1944, the Aircrew Energy Sustenance Program had become an integral part of Allied air operations. Production reached 20,000 units daily, distributed according to operational priority. The bars were credited with enabling the increasing range and effectiveness of bombing campaigns that were systematically dismantling German industrial capacity. Yet the program remained classified, one of the war's lesser-known secret weapons. Official communications referred only to Advanced Aircrew Nutrition Protocol Type C, and participants were forbidden from discussing specifics. German intelligence had obtained samples, but struggled to reverse engineer the precise formulation, particularly as they lacked access to the specific cherry varieties that seemed critical to the effect. The impact extended beyond military effectiveness to human cost. Extended flight operations had previously extracted a terrible toll on aircrew health and longevity. Pilots and navigators frequently suffered nervous breakdowns after repeated long-duration missions, their bodies and minds unable to cope with the relentless cycle of extreme alertness followed by crushing fatigue. "We're seeing significantly improved recovery patterns," reported Captain Phillips during a medical review at RAF Scampton. "Crews consuming the rations according to protocol report. Full recovery within 6 to 8 hours of rest, compared to the previous 24 to 36 hours. This means more experienced crews remaining operational, fewer stress-related errors, and ultimately more lives saved." For Mess Sergeant Arthur Holloway, the magnitude of his contribution was difficult to comprehend. Their career spent preparing conventional meals had somehow led to this moment, his simple recipe potentially altering the strategic balance of the air war. "I don't understand all the science," he confessed to his wife Martha during a rare home visit. "The doctors explain it, but it goes right over my head. I just know that our boy stayed awake during his factory shifts, and these lads are coming back from bombing runs when they might not have otherwise." Martha squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the most important discoveries are the simplest, Arthur. You saw a need and filled it with what you knew best. Good, honest food." Across the English Channel, Oberleutnant Müller was experiencing the consequences of the Allied advantage firsthand. Night after night, bomber streams penetrated deeper into German territory, their crews maintaining precision and alertness even after 16 or more hours aloft. The Luftwaffe's attempt to counter with increased pervitin dosages only led to more German pilots suffering breakdowns or making fatal errors as the drugs took their toll. "We've lost Steiner," Müller informed his squadron after a particularly difficult night. He became disoriented after his 4th consecutive night operation and flew directly into the ground during landing approach. He didn't need to explain that Steiner had been taking increased doses of pervitin to match the punishing schedule necessitated by constant Allied incursions. Intelligence Officer Schmidt looked grim. "Our pharmaceutical approach is unsustainable. For every Allied aircraft we down, we're losing pilots to stimulant side effects. Their nutritional solution appears to be providing sustainable alertness without our catastrophic after-effects. Can we not replicate their formula?" asked a young pilot. "We've tried," Schmidt replied. "But certain ingredients are increasingly unavailable to Germany due to the blockade, and there appears to be some element, possibly in the specific honey varieties or cherry type, that our scientists haven't been able to identify." As 1944 progressed, the strategic bombing campaign against German industry intensified. Allied crews, supported by their specialized nutrition, were flying longer missions with greater accuracy and returning with increasingly fewer losses. The cumulative effect was devastating to German manufacturing and morale. In June, just after D-Day, Eleanor Matheson received a letter from her husband that brought the program's impact into sharp personal focus. "Last night we struck a ball-bearing plant outside Stuttgart, an 18-hour mission that would have been beyond our effective range last year. Not only did we reach the target with enough fuel margin for safety, but our bombardier placed his payload within 30 yards of the aiming point, despite this being hour 15 of continuous operations. The navigator, who could barely function after 12 hours on previous missions, delivered us precisely on course for the entire return leg. We lost not a single aircraft from mechanical failure or crew error, only 2 to enemy action from a formation of 24. Eleanor, your work on the ration program is saving lives as surely as if you were pulling men from burning aircraft yourself." Eleanor shared the letter with Dr. Campbell, who had become not just a colleague but a friend during their intensive work together. "Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever truly know how many lives were saved by something as simple as a better energy bar," she mused as they walked through the production facility. "War advances science in strange ways," Campbell replied. "The necessity of keeping pilots alert for inhuman durations led us to discover nutritional principles that might never have been explored otherwise. After the war, these findings could benefit shift workers, emergency responders, even people with certain sleep disorders." By autumn 1944, the Allied air campaign had achieved near total supremacy. German industrial centers lay in ruins, Transportation networks were paralyzed, and fuel production had dropped to critical levels. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, had been reduced to husbanding its remaining aircraft and pilots for increasingly rare defensive operations. During a final inspection tour of RAF Scampton, before his transfer to a training role, Arthur Holloway was stunned to receive the Distinguished Service Order, an honor rarely bestowed on non-combat personnel, particularly one of his modest rank. "For exceptional service in support of Royal Air Force Bomber Command operations," read the citation, "Sergeant Holloway's innovative development of specialized aircrew nutrition has directly contributed to the enhanced operational range, effectiveness, and survivability of bomber formations conducting extended missions over enemy territory." Wing Commander Bennett, himself recently decorated for leadership during the bombing campaign, shook Holloway's hand warmly after the ceremony. "You'll never know exactly how many boys made it home because of those bars of yours, Arthur," he said quietly. "But I've seen the statistics. Somewhere between 300 and 500 aircraft that would have been lost to crew fatigue errors returned safely. At 7 men per aircraft, that's thousands of lives. Not bad for a cook, wouldn't you say?" Holloway blinked rapidly, overwhelmed. "I just fed them, sir, same as I always have." Bennett smiled. "Sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the ones that destroy, but the ones that sustain." In the final months of the war, as Germany's military and industrial capability collapsed under the relentless Allied bombing, enabled partly by the specialized nutrition program, a curious exchange took place. Marie Duchamp, the French resistance operative who had helped source critical ingredients, was contacted by her handler with an unusual request. "After liberation, preserve all records regarding the procurement network for the cherry and honey supplies," the message instructed. "Post-war nutritional research programs will require detailed information about the specific varieties and their cultivation conditions." Marie was puzzled but complied, carefully documenting the orchards and apiaries that had supplied the resistance network. Only later would she learn that the humble food ingredients she had risked her life to smuggle had been as strategically significant as any weapon component. On May 8, 1945, as victory celebrations erupted across Europe, a small private gathering took place at RAF Scampton. Wing Commander Bennett had assembled the original members of 507 Squadron, who had first tested Holloway's creation, along with the mess sergeant himself and representatives from the scientific team that had refined the formula. "To victory," Bennett proposed, raising his glass, "and to the strange paths that led us there. Who would have imagined that alongside radar, code breaking, and new aircraft designs, one of our secret weapons would be a cook's homemade energy bar?" Flight Lieutenant Westfield, now a decorated veteran of 53 combat missions, raised his own glass. "To Sergeant Holloway, whose cooking kept us awake when our lives depended on it, and whose bars delivered us home when our bodies wanted to surrender." Holloway, uncomfortable with the attention, nevertheless raised his glass. "To the boys who flew the missions, I just fed them. They did the real work." After the war, the full story of the Aircrew Energy Sustenance Program remained classified for nearly 2 decades. By the time it was declassified in the 1960s, nutritional science had moved on, and the specific combination of ingredients and their remarkable effects had become a historical curiosity rather than an active research focus. Arthur Holloway returned to Cornwall and opened a small bakery with his wife, producing a civilian version of his famous bars that gained modest local popularity, but never widespread recognition. Eleanor Matheson and Dr. Campbell established a nutritional research foundation focused on optimizing human performance through natural dietary approaches, their work quietly influenced by their wartime experience. The German scientists, who had tried to replicate the Allied advantage, eventually published their findings in obscure nutritional journals, noting that the specific combination of ingredients had produced effects that could not be explained by the nutritional science of the time. Their papers, written in technical German and published amid the chaos of post-war reconstruction, went largely unnoticed by the wider scientific community. It would be the 1990s before mainstream nutritional science began rediscovering some of the principles accidentally pioneered by Holloway's simple recipe. Research into slow-release energy, the cognitive benefits of specific fatty acids, and the role of certain plant compounds in regulating alertness cycles gradually built an understanding that would have seemed familiar to the wartime researchers who had refined the original formula. In 2003, when Arthur Holloway was long deceased, nutritional scientists at a British university happened upon archived records of the wartime program while researching the history of performance nutrition. Intrigued, they reconstructed the original recipe using modern analytical techniques. The combination was remarkably sophisticated for something developed through intuition rather than formal research, observed Dr. Helen Crawford, lead researcher on the project. Particularly impressive was the synergistic effect between compounds that wouldn't be isolated or understood until decades later. Whoever created this had an intuitive grasp of nutritional principles that science took another 50 years to formally identify. Today, energy bars based on similar principles line supermarket shelves worldwide, their military origins largely forgotten. Few of their consumers realize that the convenient snacks they grab before workouts or busy days trace their lineage to a humble mess sergeant's attempt to keep World War II bomber crews alert during missions of unprecedented duration. Perhaps the most fitting epitaph for Arthur Holloway's contribution came from James Westfield, who in a 1985 interview for a documentary on Bomber Command reflected, "We had the finest aircraft, the most sophisticated navigation equipment, and the best-trained crews. But on those endless nights over Germany, when every fiber of your being screamed for sleep and the smallest error meant death, it was Holloway's bars that kept our eyes open and our minds clear. The Lancaster might have carried us to Berlin, but it was those 5 simple ingredients that brought us home again." And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.